Hello, guys. David Vose here. Oh, man. Another beautiful day. And I feel like they're getting even more beautiful every day. But there are some hard times coming. I am hoping that being out here in the wilderness, I won't have some of those hardships. They'll not come nigh because I'm not going to go knocking. I won't be going downtown. I'll stay up here and everything will be fine. But we'll see if they, what kind of goings-ons occur, whether will be rioters even in the woods at times or what may happen. But as of right now, I'm prepared and getting more prepared every day, and I hope you are. Well, friends, yesterday I was going back to some of the videos that I had done 8 years ago. 8 and 9 years ago. And I just kind of accidentally, a friend of mine was talking about something and I was looking for something. And so I listened to a couple, 3 of my videos that I had, because I don't usually go back and listen to them all. I mean, there's so many of them. And, many years have gone by. And so it's kind of interesting to see the things I was talking about then. And of course, they're quite related, and it doesn't seem like anything has changed much. We've been talking about this for a long time, for at least over 10 years. But I was listening to some of the explanations that I was giving then about our Heavenly Father being the galaxy, and our Divine Mother being, the Heavenly Father being the light in the middle of the galaxy, so to speak, the spirit or the mind, and then the outer, material galaxy being the mother, and this is the great anthropomorphic father and mother that gave birth to man, the creation, and man being the holy anointed Christ that would reign. And then I was thinking about how so lately we've been talking about we don't even know if there is a galaxy and whether there are galaxies. And we don't know the shape of our galaxy. I had mentioned the 4 rivers representing the 4 arms of the Milky Way, which there is 4 Sagittarius and different arms, I think Capricorn and Perseus or something. But one of these kind of partial arms is Orion, but it's not really one of the arms. It's sort of a bridge that goes between 2 of the other arms. It's kind of separated out from them. Well, that's the pictures that they show. So I will upgrade that a little bit to say we don't know if any such arrangement exists. But what I do think that is that information was still correct, since even though we don't know if there is even a galaxy in that way. And we're not really sure what the stars or how far they are, but we're relatively on the same idea here. It's kind of like everything, as I'll get into further as we go, but I believe everything that's ever written by the priests, and perhaps even today when you go to the movies and you see these, what we call comic book, Batman and Superman, these seem to be telling the same story. Superman is representing Jesus Christ, and I think maybe the devil is being represented by Batman in some sense. And then you've got Batman against Superman in a movie, And there are other little symbols that give it away. I mean, Batman was underground, right? Superman was from above. Superman could fly, could really fly. Batman could just hang on to the wall with spider webs or something. But Batman had a signal that he could give to the police, to the military, to the war apparatus, to the control, the government. and they would do whatever he said. He would call them and say, "There's some terrible thing," dun, 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 dun. You know, the cops would come. But with Superman, remember, in his daily, normal clothes that he wore, not with his Superman cape or his superpowers, but in his daily life, he was just like one of us. And he worked at the media, at the newspaper. So he was a journalist. He was a good guy. He wasn't in the government. He was trying to expose the government, right? He was trying to find the news of the day and let everybody know. He was a gospel preacher. But Superman, he's not powerful in his normal clothes. He represents us. But he got to take those old clothes off, and then down beneath he got a special coat with an S written on it, which is a serpent. And his father's name is El, and he's very powerful, and he saves the world. So everywhere you see the truth. Now, I'm going to show you here in a little bit, because we're going to get to the bottom of some things. I'm going to read to you from Critias, the story with Plato and different ones discussing, Socrates discussing the ancient truths that we have been talking about, and that's in the Bible and the Atlantis and different things. And it's going to be able to put in perspective everything that we've been talking about. But it is some kind of scholarly work. I don't know what we'll call it, but it's a writing, just as the scriptures are writings. And just as we find these ancient truths in the sky, in astrology, in every nation on earth, whether it's Sumerian, Babylonian, Egyptian, or African, or Chinese, or whatever, or Mesoamerica, they all have the same teachings. And so it all comes from whatever this message is in the stars. And the message of the stars was probably learned, because it wasn't just, it's not a real message, right? It's just a bunch of stars flung out there. But somebody said this group of stars means this, and they put the story there. But the story is our history. And it's about the stars. It's about us. And it was then first written after the flood, well, actually before the flood, by Enoch, or Thoth, in the Great Pyramid. It's literally written in their pyramid walls. And after the flood, the Egyptians had a priesthood, which was the closest that remained of the ancient Atlantean priesthood, because they still had this big temple, and therefore their priesthood understood and knew through legends, not because they were alive then, but remember, after the flood, there were certain individuals that were alive. Ham and Nimrod. Nimrod lived to be 215 years old, and he had these laws and these ancient writings, and they were the interpreters, or the priesthood, that held these things until it was later taken over by Esau and then sold to his brother Jacob. But these stories are the true ones. And so when Plato was talking about Atlantis, he's giving you the information of not just our history, just like the Bible before the flood back to Adam, but he gives it back to Atlas, who is the son of Poseidon, and we'll talk about that. So he's describing a time before a flood, a mythological flood, a real flood that represented a mythological, more spiritual, esoteric truth, which we'll find is that we're in this plan. We have a purpose. It's the plan or the blueprint for mankind. Why we're here, what we're doing, the race that we're running, who's in charge and why. And along the way, we're going to learn some principles about physics and why there's gravity, why we're here, why there's material things, and how the mind is to overcome, and that this is the whole process, that we're graduating through classrooms. There are 12 houses. So the heavens are literally broke up into 12, and due to the way in which we orbit and so forth, and we do orbit, I don't think the Earth is flat like a pancake. It's like a big mountain, and beneath the mountain is a great sea. It's like a top. So it literally is almost identical if you describe it as the globe, but it's not actually a globe. It's a big mountain, and then a big base, and then the sea, and the sea goes out to a place that is frozen. But this is the bottomless pit, like a hurricane or a tornado. Everything is sucked up from the bottom and spit out at the top, and yet it forms a round vortex at the peripheral, a lot like they describe the galaxy. So I don't know that scientists today have actually seen the galaxy. I don't think they have. I don't think they know the shape or how many arms from their telescopes. I think they're lying about that. I think they've got priests, they've got scholars who study these things, and they've got books that we don't even have because they won't let us read them. And they knew all of this information about our galaxy. I think it is what it is. I think we are little spheres. At least that's how we explain it. Because there's nothing physical. It's just we manifest everything around us. But it is a thing with positive and negative, and a swirling and a vortex, and certain negative and positive poles, and being born and dying and evolving and advancing. And so we're going to find that the universe isn't physical, and so therefore it really isn't a globe, and it's really not even flat. We're beings, spiritual beings, and we are not in time and space, but we project time and space by concepts. And so everything's a concept, and we have to describe it in some kind of symbol to understand it, like we do with language, with little scribbly letters and pictures that we can put together to try and express ourselves, or maybe sign language or vocal sounds. But we're expressing ourselves by trying to communicate with these vibrations and receiving them. But the lesser way to understand them is through parable. The greater way is by being or knowing. So until we know, we use parables. And so in the ancient times, they used these stories we see in the stars, but they're still using them. And so science today, with the galaxies and the novas and all their explanations, isn't true. It's idolatry. They've taken these symbols and these truths, and they are truths, and they've expressed it, this wisdom, this concept, the truth, as far as they understand it. They express it in dramas and letters and languages and books and concept and science and cosmology. Well, the cosmology is true. There's negative and positive and male and female. These are symbolic concepts. But to then draw a structure based on the knowledge, the truth, try to conceive of a way to express truth by, we'll write a circle, and that will mean or represent the whole. It's an accurate language, and you can use it to learn a great deal, but ultimately you must know. So the science that we have today is probably as good as they could comprehend in their state of existence. They're not lying, really. NASA, these scientists that tell you they've seen galaxies and stuff, they think that they have, but they're seeing it through some other perception, not through the normal lens of the eye. They're using all kinds of speculation, but they think it's very accurate, and they know about models, and they may change their model, but this is the best they can do. And their idea of the far-flung stars and the galaxies and the rungs of the all this stuff is a picture, an idol, basically. Their thoughts on what it would look like if you were physical, which we're not. In ancient times, they understood principles, and then it got more materialistic, and we become more and more apostate, and we've become idolaters. And so science and modern government and the modern human is an idolater just by the way they understand the universe. They're worshiping materiality as though it's real. Anybody who's not aware and free is able to perceive of the eternal world where it's not the outer form, the pleasure, the greed. And because their hearts are weighed down with sin and their minds are only on pleasure and lust, they form, the universe becomes hard and materialistic as it's harsh and vengeful. So all of their explanations are based on truths, but what we're going to be trying to understand is the spiritual esoteric truth, and not necessarily whether or not they're certain that that star is that many light years away. We don't know how many light years away it really is. We haven't traveled there, and we can't see it, but we can speculate, and that's what they're doing, and that's what science is. It's their best model that they have. And so mankind has been evolving and advancing, and this knowledge was known and is written in the Bhagavad Gita and the Egyptian hieroglyphs and our Hebrew Reader's Digest version, which was the last version given to us as Holy Writ to sort of pacify our knowledge in a very small little parable until the time of the end. So then I have said now that we don't know, too much about the stars other than they're there. Well, we do know everything that we've been saying about them. They're worlds. But they are not in our dimension, or shall we say our time, in our space. So all these beings like demons are interdimensional because any being that lives in our time and our space is here in our earth. And there are no others. And the only way to get into this earth is to be born through time. And if you're on another, in another world, you're in another space and you're in another time. And so all the beings manifest throughout these different times. And there are these 12 tribes and 72, it's broken down, and the whole billions of entities that incarnate and the whole process. And I was talking about that years ago, about this process of entering through the Jacob's ladder and descending and ascending through the astrological wheel as we go through the galactic starry night. But you have to then understand that, yes, those stars are places, worlds without end, amen. But they are further progressive and degressive. They are either from the past or the future, and we live in the present. So in the present moment, there are no aliens landing. However, in the past, the Zeta Reticula, or the prisons of the South, is where these demons live. Why are they demons? Well, in their day, they were human. They were physical beings. And they were us in that time. We all had to go through these stages. But now that we have released those cocoons, those subtle bodies, and are now living in this body and are ready to get our crowns and get our white robes, there are still some that are listening and bringing up the dead, shall we say, like the witch of Endor, who brought up Samuel and said she saw a deity. And he prophesied correctly of Saul. There's nothing wrong with it. It was part of the arts of the priesthood in those days. And of course, David did it, got the Holy Spirit. He went up there and danced. And that was up there in Syria, where the higher priesthood went, where Elijah and Elisha went up to Syria. And Elisha made the Eleusinian mysteries there, which he got from Elijah, whose name was actually Elias, not Elijah. That's from the Masoretic scribes. But those ancient truths were then from the backdrop of the Gentiles or the Greeks or the area of the Poseidon. And we then find that all of history is not just from the point of view of the Judeans. They're only one tribe. The 10 tribes were scattered and went and mixed, married and wedded the Canaanite priestess. Dan, who married the Canaanites. And even Judah married the Canaanite Tamar, because you cannot reign or be king or priest without being married to the Canaanite, as Moses was to the Cushite woman, and as David and Solomon married Bathsheba, and produced all these wives that they married because they had to wed all of them so that the royal seed was in every nation. And so we're talking about history, but we're also talking about a divine history. Like the little history we read about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's all true, and they did various things that were literal, but it is woven in a parabolic fashion to tell the story of our astrological ages, which goes from our incarnations and transmigrations. When we came in and reached the tower or the Mount of Vega, there was somebody that got to this mountain, the Mount Vega. That's the North Pole. Now it's Polaris because Jesus is ascending, and Polaris is the Phoenix or the Messiah, Jesus. And Polaris ascended and will reach its zenith in 2100 AD. But 12,000 years ago, it was Vega. And this is the mountain of meeting where this Yahweh, his lot fell upon Israel, or the 12, or the entire zodiac sphere. But it was the sphere of night. There are 12 hours at night, and then Jesus takes over the 12 hours of the day. We won't go too much into that. We do that all the time. But I will say here, to maybe clear up one confusion, I've had people ask me, in Deuteronomy 32:8, there is the 70 gods and the 70 nations, but Israel's lot fell upon Yahweh. So they're like, wait a minute, are the 12 part of the 72? Then Yahweh rules all of them, right? Because all the 70, the 72, this is rounded up to 70 in the Bible, came from Jacob's loins. And the 72 came up out of Egypt with Moses. So, you see, really, it's saying Yahweh is the supreme leader of the night. And there are 12 hours at night. And so Yahweh is over the administrating 12, and this multiplies to the great nations, but it would be Israel that would be a kingdom over the other 72. So Yahweh was commissioned, or his lot was that he was the head deity. He would be the accuser. He would be the deity of this world, of the night side, which had the 12 hours. And during that time, he was the supreme ruler. That was his kingdom. We hadn't ascended yet. Christ was still down there being punished under the law. He was cursed at the very beginning. And so, cursed is anyone who's hanged upon a tree. And he went down, and we all followed him into that lower realm, and we went through those times. Cain's 7 times, the beast man, and we were, the body, we were the woman, we were being chased by this monster, the carnal concepts and the vengeance and the jealousy and the lower ego, which reigned over us. So, yes, Yahweh reigned over the whole world. We hadn't actually ascended yet. Christ's kingdom hadn't actually even been established yet. Now, it was established before, because these are cycles. So there was 12,000 years back to a certain time when Vega was the pole star, and now we're about to ascend. Polaris is about to ascend and make it zenith in 2100. And Jesus Christ will return in 2028 or thereabouts and take up his kingdom, and 1,000-year reign will begin. But his kingdom will last for about 12,000 years in this galaxy. And then we will move on to a greater world beyond. But I'm telling you that is in time. It's cyclical and it's advancement. We go through the bottom, we go to the top of the wheel. So the firstborn is Joseph, which is one tribe. And all the other children get their inheritance in him because the firstborn has the inheritance. And if he doesn't have the inheritance, then the other children don't have any inheritance. And the woman has no inheritance without her firstborn son. And so this is why Leah and Rachel fought, because Leah was the old covenant and her lastborn son was Judah. He ended up ruling over the old covenant. But the favorite wife, Rachel, her firstborn was Joseph, and he's the one who gets the inheritance. And all the nations shall be blessed through him, because he will be the firstborn. So he is that one tribe, which is Orion, that rises on the horizon. So we advance through these 12 gates, and everyone is born into one of these 12. Now, everybody today, we're all born in different months, but in another life, we were born in other months. So we're not just one tribe. The tribe itself is the body. We're a divine being. We've always existed. And these bodies have different blessings and different sort of futures. They're being controlled by this nature that's in each of the houses, these deities. And you have to overcome them one at a time. Right now, the universe is right here. Mind is right here. There's no time and space. And those worlds that we see out there in the stars that we've graduated through, ascending and descending, they're real and they're there, but you get there through time and through birth, and not in a tin can with rocket fuel. So I want to point out that I haven't changed my mind that the stars are inhabited. If you look out in the heavens and you see a star, you can rightly imagine that there is a planet around that star, or more than one planet, where there are great civilizations and people live. But at the very moment that you're looking at them, there's nothing there, because that light travels at a great speed and takes time to get here. So what you're seeing, that flickering star, is deep into the past. And all those stars differ in star and glory. They're all different places of the past. The future is really just this classroom that we're going through as well. When we reach a place where we have been exalted and get our white robes, they're robes of light, and we go back to our Heavenly Father and Mother, which is in the center of the light. Because it's through the center of the light that we go on through the wormhole to the next world. So you enter into the bottom of the hurricane through the suction. The pull, which is the gravity, which is that force that a hurricane has of negative and positive, two poles, a high and low place, a warm and a cold front, that come together and make a vortex, negative and positive, male and female. And so the universe is this way, and it has motion, and then we have all these things and variables and quantums because of the male and the female. And this is creation. And what is created is consciousness, or the divine logos. I mention that because it's the same reason that our galaxy is a spiral. And I think scientists don't know it's a spiral because they saw it in the telescope, but because they know the ancient esoteric wisdom. They know that much about it. But they have also apostatized from the wisdom of it. But the ancient ones describe everything in these principles, and this is how we know that the galaxy is a swirling thing with stars swirling around, and we're graduating, going in to the center, and coming out the top and going around. But when we go back in, we're going through a wormhole into what is now like a figure 8 to the next galaxy. Because it's going to look almost identical. They're carbon copies. It's going to be like our galaxy. And this will be in more advanced, higher stage or layer on the DNA strands. It is an endless strand of advancement. A spiraling circle that never comes back to the same spot. But the pit that is beneath us is a bottomless pit. And that's from which and where we came. So when you see their picture of our world, it's not quite right. Actually, if you were to draw a picture with my model, which would perhaps be a step up, a revelation, and yet it's just a model, it's only a concept, but I think it's a more accurate model, and that is that each of the planets are connected, positive to negative, positive to negative. They are forces that have great spinning vortices, and everything goes and evolves through and around. And as you come back around, you enter into the center, which is now another world, an infinite world, that appears to be the same world, but it's just inverted. So we go from physical to spiritual. We go from spiritual to physical. And through the physical negative side, we learn through gradations, and we go up the spiraling wheel. So if you were to walk to the North Pole, you'd walk through a wormhole. It might, though, appear to be going inward into the interior of the Earth, but inside the Earth is the next rung on this spiraling DNA. And our Earth is just one of the rungs, and we go to Mercury or Venus and Mercury and the sun goes to some other powerful light, perhaps Vega and Polaris and various planets in that direction, and Arcturus and different planets that is further beyond this Earth. So I think once we are done with this Earth, many of us come back many, many times, but once we're done with this classroom, we go through this wormhole, which is death, and are awakened and come alive into the next stage on the DNA, which is probably Vega. I like to think of it as we're going on vacation, we're going to Vegas, you know? So as we are moving out towards the outer extremity of the galaxy, we're going towards Vega or Polaris or the North Star. Well, when you're on the Earth, you can't see the stars unless it's at nighttime. So in the northern hemisphere, when you're looking at the winter sky, you're looking directly north, you're looking directly to the center of the galaxy. So this is why we're spinning. Everything's spinning around Polaris, and 12,000 years ago was spinning around Vega. This is the mountain of meeting, where the devil wanted to raise his throne, where Yahweh became the deity over the 12, the Israel, and therefore the deity over the 70, which is during the night. And we're looking back towards the center, and he's gained his ascension. Well, if you're looking in the northern hemisphere at night, because you wouldn't see the stars unless you're at night, during the night, you look up and you see Polaris, and we're revolving around that. Well, in the summer, around July and August, you're looking directly back into the center of the galaxy, into the blazing light of the center of the galaxy. So it's visible in the northern hemisphere in the summer at night. It's visible in summer because it is the summer, the great summer, the light. So since you can only see the stars at night, when night comes and you look up in the summer and you're looking towards the center of the galaxy, you're looking towards Polaris. And so that was considered the throne of deity. But this is a story about the infinite past, about when all of us rose from the light and ascended through stages all the way to the top of the mountain, which is in the north, which then is Polaris, which is Mount Olympus of the Olympians. It is Mount Zion of the Elohim, back to our Heavenly Father through the wormhole at the top of the mountain. Just as through the North Pole, the spirit enters into the body and is born through the south, or the bottom of a woman. So we all entered into this galaxy through the north of the spiraling vortice and came in where we had come from as the bottom of a lower spiraling vortice. And we were spit out the top of it and going and entering spiritually through the top of this galaxy. We went down, meaning we incarnated into many bodies, going all the way to the top of the mountain of the winter sky, which is Mount Sinai, which is where Yahweh reigns, which is where Yahweh gained ascendancy. And now Jesus as Polaris is going to have a balance with his brother, shall we say. And Esau and Jacob, Cain and Abel, or the forces of good and evil, will become balanced when Polaris reaches its zenith in 2100. But the Mount Zion is on the summer solstice. And in the summer solstice, the sun reigns, and this is the Mount Zion. You'll notice that Sinai and Mount Horeb were really the same mountain, just inverted. And so we're going out, but we're really going around the donut and going back in the bottom. And so we're not really going out or in. We're just going up and advancing. And that bottomless hole from which we came, or the abyss, is below us. But I want to read you from Critias, and this is a ancient writing, a Platonic writing, and it will tell us a lot about science and our history. So let me read to you a little of this Critias, and I'll start with what we have. I'll read you the whole thing because we've only got a fragment. And it says this: Timaeus, how thankful I am, Socrates, that I have arrived at last and, like a weary traveler after a long journey, may be at rest. And I pray the being who always was of old and has now been by me revealed, to grant that my words may endure, in so far as they have been spoken truly and acceptably to him. But if unintentionally I have said anything wrong, I pray that he will impose upon me a just retribution. And the just retribution of him who errs is that he should be set right, wishing then to speak truly in future concerning the generation of the gods. I pray him to give me knowledge, which of all medicines is the most perfect and best. And now, having offered my prayer, I deliver up the argument to Critias, who is to speak next to our agreement. Critias, and I, Timaeus, accept the trust, and as you, at first, said that you were going to speak of high matters, and beg that some forbearance might be shown to you, I too ask the same, or greater forbearance, for what I am about to say, and although I very well know that my request may appear to be somewhat ambitious and discourteous, I must make it nevertheless, for will any man of sense deny that you have spoken well? I can only attempt to show that I ought to have more indulgence than you, because my theme is more difficult, and I shall argue that to seem to speak well of the gods to men is far easier than to speak well of men to men, for the experience and utter ignorance of his hearers about any subject is a great assistance to him who has to speak of it. And we know how ignorant we are concerning the gods. But I should like to make my meaning clearer, if you will follow me. All that is said by any of us can only be imitation and representation. For if we consider the likeness which painters make of bodies divine and heavenly, and the different degrees of gratification with which the eye of the spectator receives them, we shall see that we are satisfied with the artist who is able to, in any degree, to imitate the earth and its mountains and the rivers and the woods and the universe and the things that are and move therein, and further, that knowing nothing precise about such matters, we do not examine or analyze the painting. All that is required is a sort of indistinct and deceptive mode of shadowing them forth. But when a person endeavors to paint the human form, we are quick at finding out defects, and our familiar knowledge makes us severe judges of anyone who does not render every point of similarity, and we may observe the same thing to happen in discourse. We are satisfied with a picture of divine and heavenly things, which has very little likeness to them, but we are more precise in our criticism of mortal and human things. Wherefore, if at the moment of speaking, I cannot suitably express my meaning, you must excuse me, considering that to form a proved likeness of human things is the reverse of easy. This is what I want to suggest to you, and at the same time to beg, Socrates, that I may have not less, but more indulgence conceded to me in what I am about to say, which favor, if I am right in asking, I hope that you will be ready to grant. Socrates. Certainly, Critias, we will grant your request, and we will grant the same by anticipation to Hermocrates, as well as to you and Timaeus, for I have no doubt that when his turn comes a little while hence, he will make the same request with which you have made, in order then that he may provide himself with a fresh beginning, and not to be compelled to say the same things over again. Let him understand that the indulgence is already extended and by anticipation to him. And now, friend Critias, I will announce to you the judgment of the theatre. They are of opinion that the last performer was wonderfully successful, and that you will need a great deal of indulgence before you will be able to take his place. Hermocrates. The warning, Socrates, which you have addressed to him, I must also take to myself, but remember, Critias, that faint heart never yet raised a trophy, and therefore you must go and attack the argument like a man. First invoke Apollo and the Muses, and then let us hear you sound the praises and show forth the virtues of your ancient citizens. Critias. Friend Hermocrates, you who are stationed last and have another in front of you, have not lost heart as yet. The gravity of the situation will soon be revealed to you. Meanwhile, I accept your exhortations and encouragements, but besides the gods and goddesses whom you have mentioned, I would especially invoke Mnemosyne, for all the important part of the discourse is dependent on her favor. And if I can recollect and recite enough of what was said by the priests and brought hither by Solan, parenthesis, Solan is an Egyptian priest, and this was information handed on from the Egyptian priests that they received from the Great Pyramids and their priesthood that goes back to Thoth and before the flood, or before the fall of Atlantis. I doubt not that I shall satisfy the requirements of this theatre. And now, making no more excuses, I will proceed. Let me begin by observing, first of all, that 9,000 was the sum of years which had elapsed since the war which was said to have taken place between those who dwelt outside the Pillars of Hercules. And now, by the way, the Pillars of Hercules are said to be the gates of Gibraltar, which is near Morocco, between Morocco and Spain, or Portugal, and that's leading out of the Mediterranean westward to the Atlantic or Atlantis. So outside the Pillars of Hercules, and all who dwelt within them, this war I am going to describe of the combatants on the one side. The city of Athens was reported to have been the leader and to have fought out the war. The combatants on the other side were commanded by the kings of Atlantis, which, as I was saying, was an island greater in extent than Libya and Asia. Okay, that's pretty big. And then, when afterwards sunk by an earthquake, became an impassable barrier of mud to voyagers sailing from hence to any part of the ocean. The progress of the history will unfold. The various nations of barbarians and families of the Hellenes, which then existed, as they successively appear on the scene. But I must describe first of all the Athenians of that day and their enemies who fought with them, and then the respective powers and governments of the two kingdoms. Let us give the precedence to Athens. In the days of old, the gods had the whole earth distributed among them by allotment. There was no quarreling, for you cannot rightly suppose that the gods did not know what was proper for each of them to have, or knowing this, that they would seek to procure for themselves by contention that which more properly belonged to others. They all of them, by just apportionment, obtained what they wanted, and peopled their own districts. And when they had peopled them, they tended us, their nurslings and possessions, as shepherds tend their flocks, excepting only that they did not use blows or bodily force, as shepherds do, but governed us like pilots from the stern of the vessel, which is an easy way of guiding animals, holding our souls by the rudder of persuasion, according to their own pleasure. This sounds a lot like what's happening in the world today. Us peasants don't know what's going on. We're like animals. We're the sheep. And they're the shepherd, and they're just guiding us. They don't come down here and smack us around, but they seem to have laws placed through individuals that are like prophets that sort of teach man and guide our laws and so forth. So it's like holding our souls by the rudder of persuasion according to their own pleasure. Thus did they guide all mortal creatures. Now different gods had their allotments. And this sounds a lot like Deuteronomy 32:8, which talks about the 70 nations that were divided in the world to the 70 gods who ruled over them. Now, friends, we need to pause here. Take careful note what we're talking about when we're talking about the 70 gods or the 72. Jesus chose 72 also. The 12 that he chose were to reign upon thrones, and he chose 72 also. And 70 souls came from the loins of Jacob. And there were 70 nations that departed from Babylon or Babel when it was confused, according to the rabbis. And so these are the 70 nations which are divided for what reason? Because of 70 gods? Who are these gods? Well, it's astrology. And so what we're talking about is a circle with 70 sections, which is, to this day we say, oh, January, February. These are the names of deities. And you enter in through one of the 12 gates into the physical universe by being born into one of the 12 months. And you're then, your planet that rules over you is this deity, your specific tribe. So when, as we'll see here as we go along, when Plato and these individuals are discussing this, what they're talking about is a time before the flood. Our Bible has Poseidon, but he's Japheth. He got the Isles of the Sea. Well, but wait a minute. Poseidon is a deity. Yes, because Noah was before the flood, lived 600 years before the flood. He was a deity. And his son Japheth lived 100 years or more before the flood. It's a long time. And in 100 years, he was known as one of these divine beings that probably lived 900 years after the flood. So this is what they're referring to, is that the time before the flood was a time that was like the Garden of Eden. It was the days of Atlantis. They don't necessarily tell you that Atlantis time existed after the flood, but that these deities had relations with humans and began to get debased. This is just a quick Reader's Digest version of our biblical story of the Noah's flood. And so Noah has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Japheth get the Isles of the Sea. And this is why he's saying that in the time of these 10 kings, which is the Gog of Magog, and it's actually that very word, Gog and Magog, is used in the Greek genealogies as the sons of Japheth, not only in our Bible, but in the Greek mythologies. There's some kind of a Greek beast of 10 horns, which is the 10 sons of Japheth. And they went north up into Europe, and they became the 10 Germanic tribes that today rule the world. And we've talked about this. And also, it has something to do with the 10 tribes, because they went north over the Caucasus and became the Caucasians. Some of them became these 10 tribes. Not all of them, because remember, there are many, many children of Jacob who had different wives, and they were different colors, and they went all over the world. But we're talking about this one group, Dan, who marries Delilah. He's got lineage from the Jews and from the Danites, and then he marries into the princess of the Canaanite line. And they get the lineal descendants all the way down to from Hercules or Samson to the Greek Alexander the Great, and even the Caesars, and even the Irish Mackinac tribe, who reigned over the Dens. One of the largest den or kingdom, kind of in the center of Ireland, was Mackinac, today pronounced as McConaughey, which is my mother's line. Her maiden name was McConaughey, and this is why I know about this lineage that goes back to King David and all the way back to Adam, both through the Judean line and through Japheth, who had the Isles of the Sea, and who formed this 10 tribes that are lost in the world, and their relations to the daughters of men. And this was this great sin. The divine beings, before the flood, then began to go out and have relations with these other individuals. Now, as they describe Atlantis in circles, within circles, and the great Jerusalem, or the great Atlantis, right, built in the very center, the citadel, ruled over by Poseidon himself. This was only a pattern that Poseidon was making that was a symbolic story of our ancient past, which was the 12 tribes, the 12 galactic individuals that started on the place that we call the star Vega today, which 12,000 years ago, 10,000 BC, Vega was the pole star, and therefore the mountain of meeting, or Zion. And this is the mountain that was taken over by the devil, who raised his throne above the stars of deity. And you see it there in the symbology. And I did videos about this 8 years ago. You can go back and look at these and tell of this migration of the tribes and how they have come from Vega to other places like Alpha Centauri and the Earth and Sirius and the Pleiades and different in Orion, and where these planets and stars are in relation to our 12 tribes, and what the zodiac has to do with all of this. And this is our migration, and the stars differing in star and glory, and our graduation, ascending and descending on the ladder that Jacob found, which is your spiritual rising of consciousness. The ascending as well as the descending, the angels of deity ascending and descending. How are angels descending? Because they're us. We descended, and now we ascend and become angels and get our wings and white robes. Do you see, friends, the symbology? Jacob has 12 sons. This is the zodiac. And the angels are ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So, Atlantis may have been a veritable, real city somewhere in America, but it's telling us about the original city of Poseidon, who lived before the flood, that was here in America. After the flood, the Egyptians are the only ones that had any of this information, because it was written in the Great Pyramid, which survived the flood. And they're the ones that handed this knowledge down to the philosophers, or the Athenian rulers, the Sotirs, or the saviors, Ptolemy Soter, and the Savior, Jesus Christ, who was to come and reveal that this is a graduating school master that led to Christ, and that we were being deceived by the idols that we worship. And so we'll see how this relates to astrology, Atlantis, with the circles and the bulls, and it talks about all these different animals and different things. And we'll see that it's an anagram in pictures of our history, which is what astrology is as well. And it is describing our universe coming from the center of the universe, from the light, from our Father and Divine Mother. We're born of the material of the Mother, out of the bottom of the human, which is the South Pole, but we enter in through the top. And therefore we entered from Vega and descended all the way into Orion and beyond into the chambers of the South, beyond Orion, because Orion is a prison. It's an area of the galaxy that is separated off like a bridge from Sagittarius to Capricorn, the arms that come out from the center of the great sun. And we're spiraling down this and advancing and descending. We had to come in and eventually make our way back to our Heavenly Father. But the outer darkness is the outer part of the galaxy, and scientists say that it may be 100,000 light years across the galaxy. And we're like 2/3 out, so we would be about 40,000 light years from the center of the galaxy. And we've been advancing through Orion or Aldebaran and the Pleiades on down past the Earth to Vega and to Polaris, our present North Star, which will be at its zenith in 2100. And this Polaris star is in the Chinese, the emperor's seat, the king. And in Sumerian, it was called the Phoenix, which is Enoch, which is Jesus. And so Jesus is rising and will be fully and completely at its zenith in less than 100 years. However, that's not referring to his coming. He will be reigning at his zenith. So we might well believe then that since Jesus is going to return probably in 2028, as we've seen from biblical chronology, there will then be several months of cleaning up different things according to the book of Ezekiel, and then another 40 years before we clean up the earth and we're able to really start to restore it. So this means that there'll be even a few more years after that before we reach the zenith of the rule or reign of Jesus. There still might be some residual. During the 1,000 years, there still will be some death as well, all the way for 1,000 years, because the rest of the dead didn't come to life until 1,000 years were over. So there's a lot of dates that we don't know anything about that we'll be looking forward to even after Christ returns. Up to this point, all we're looking forward to is the coming of Christ. Afterwards, we'll be thinking about other dates that are coming, other plateaus that we're going to reach. So we've got these 70, which are the nations, and we've got Israel, which is the 12. And then the 12 rolls over the 70, and the 70 over, well, that's everything. So the 70 gods reigned over the 70 nations, and Jehovah's lot became Israel. Now, different gods had their allotments. Hephaestus and Athene, who were brother and sister, and sprang from the same father, having a common nature and being united also in the love of philosophy and art, both obtained as their common portion this land, which was naturally adapted for wisdom and virtue. And there they implanted brave children of the soil, and put into their minds the order of government. Their names are preserved, but their actions have disappeared by reason of the destruction of those who received the tradition, and the lapse of ages. For when there were any survivors, as I have already said, they were men who dwelt in the mountains, and they were ignorant of the art of writing, and had heard only the names of the chiefs of the land, but very little about their actions. The names they were willing enough to give to their children, but the virtues and the laws of their predecessors they knew only by obscure traditions. And as they themselves and their children lacked for many generations the necessaries of life, they directed their attention to the supply of their wants, and of them they conversed, to the neglect of events that had happened in times long past. For mythology and the inquiry into antiquity are first introduced into cities when they begin to have leisure, and when they see that the necessaries of life have already been provided, but not before. And this is the reason why the names of the ancients have been preserved to us, and not their actions. This I infer because Solan said that the priests in their narrative of that war mention most of the names which are recorded prior to the time of Theseus, such as Cecrops and Erechtheus and Erechtheus and Erechthonius and Erichthon, and the names of the women in like manner. Moreover, since military pursuits were common to men and women, the men of those days, in accordance with the custom of the time, set up a figure, an image of the goddess in full armor, to be a testimony that all animals which associate together, male as well as female, may, if they please, practice in common the virtue which belongs to them without distinction of sex. Now, the country was inhabited in those days by various classes of citizens. There were artisans, and there were husbandmen, and there was also a warrior class, originally set apart by divine men. Divine men? The latter dwelt by themselves, and had all things suitable for nurture and education. Neither had any of them anything of their own, but they regarded that they had as common property, nor did they claim to receive of the other citizens anything more than their necessary food. This sounds like having all things common, as in the early church. And they practiced all the pursuits which we yesterday described as those of our imaginary guardians. Concerning the country, the Egyptian priests said is not only probable but manifestly true, that the boundaries were in those days fixed by the isthmus, and that in the direction of the continent they extended as far as the heights of Citharion and Parnis, and boundary line came down in the direction by the sea, having the district of Oropus on the right, and with the river Asopus as the limit on the left. The land was the best in the world, and was therefore able in those days to support a vast army raised from the surrounding people. Even the remnant of Attica, which now exists, may compare with any region in the world for the variety of excellence of its fruits and the suitableness of its pastures to every sort of animal, which proves what I am saying. But in those days the country was fair, as now, and yielded far more abundant produce. How shall I establish my words? Anyway, guys, we're getting over an hour, and so I'm going to do a part 2 on this. And I'll finish what I'm reading, and I'll finish up some of my thoughts, and we'll get in our mind squarely exactly the course of this world spiritually and physically and what we're doing here. And perhaps this will help us understand a lot of different things, not only spiritual things, but even maybe cosmology. But I'm going to leave it there, and I'll get back to you guys tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful evening. May the Lord bless you, and He will. Have a good one.